Hi, my name is Richard Paz, and today I will be walking you through how to prepare an AWS account for formal NIST 853 revision audits. And we're going to be using AWS Audit Manager to do this preparation. Now, this is a very extensive process, so I will walk you through a very singular scenario, but you'll be able to get the gist of how to assess a single AWS account. Now here's a diagram of what we're about to do. First, you select an AWS account. In my initial proposal, I suggested that we just do a separate service, but because of how in-depth this type of assessment goes, and it's just not practical to just focus on a service. These type of assessments are intended for a full-on account, or if not multiple accounts, and you'll kind of see that as we go through the steps of this. So we're going to set up AWS config. We're going to talk through AWS Security Hub, and then we're going to go through AWS Audit Manager to essentially accomplish this pre-audit, if you will. Essentially, the purpose of using these tools is to prepare yourselves for a full-on audit of your AWS environment. And in the NIST world, this would grant you an authority to operate. It's kind of something that is done in government spaces or DoD spaces where each network enclave that processes federal data needs to have some sort of authority to operate. It's their authorization to be able to process the data that they process and accomplish what they want with their network. Okay, so moving on. Let's go ahead and get started. So I am logged into my student account that I've used for the course. I believe it is possible for you to log into a specific auditing account and then set up AWS configure so that you can ingest the data. That gets a little more complex for the purposes of this exercise. Essentially, log into the account in which you would like to prepare for the audit. So here's AWS config. Just type it into the search bar, and you'll get something similar. Now, if your AWS config is already set up, it'll look similar to this. If it's not set up, there's an option called a one-click setup. Now, that is what I selected, just because I had no particulars. The whole purpose of AWS config is to automatically evaluate the recorded configurations against the configurations that you specify. So that's kind of what's happening here as you described. So you're evaluating the your environment's configurations by virtue of AWS config, and it kind of spits it back out to all your applications and reflects on how they are configured from your S3 buckets, your EC2 instances, so on and so forth. So let's say you've already done the one-click setup, walks you through a few prompts, and then you are met with this. You can hit View Dashboard. And now AWS config itself also has some information, more so pertaining to misconfigurations for specific services or based on specific rules. Um, I don't find this one to be as useful for the purposes of preparing for the assessment. However, if you are trying to hone in on the configuration of your environments, this is where you would look to see deviations or non-compliance metrics. Um, but other than that, I would just get this set up, make sure that it is the data is properly being ingested into the environment. And then from here, we will go on to AWS Security Hub. Okay, here is the summary view of AWS Security Hub. Here we have some standards, some asset insights with some AWS findings, findings by region. Right now, we're only looking at North Virginia, US East. So all these findings are from my account. But as you can see, you can kind of customize it if you have different um, accounts in different regions and you want to kind of segment them, you can in this capacity. So now let's go to view standards. So here you see different standards, different frameworks that are analyzed against your AWS environment. So we already have a couple metrics for AWS foundational security best practices, some CAIS benchmarks, and then you'll see down below to the right is the NIST SP 800-53. So before we go into the results, this just goes to show you that what Security Hub can do. It is a hub where you can see multiple benchmarks and metrics all at once. If you have a multi-tenant or multi segmented environment where maybe one side of it processes healthcare or HIPAA, and then the other one processes financial information where you need to implement PCI DSS type of standards, you can analyze those in that different capacity kind of thing. So very, very useful tool if known how to use correctly. But for the purposes of this, let's go ahead and see the results of the NIST metrics. So here it gives you an overall security score, 82%. Not terrible. It could be better, definitely. There's always room for improvement. And then it has the fail checks, the compliance checks. It categorizes them in high, critical, medium, and low. Generally speaking, the criticals are always going to be addressed first, unless there's some sort of zero-day attack, which would normally categorize it as critical. But you can drill down into here, see that it is something pertaining to hardware MFA. Let's see, standards and requirements. Huh. Interestingly enough. Oh, here we go. IAM6. This control checks whether your AWS account is enabled to use a hardware multi-factor device to sign in with root user credentials. So here it tells you the finding. You click here for remediation findings. And let's go back here. So this is IAM.6. So that's how AWS identifies what type of fix. So when you go to this, it's a fairly large article with multiple IAM issues. So basically, MFA should be enabled for the root user. Uh, Here, it's looking like it's a physical MFA device to sign in with your root credentials. I have a I have a digital version. So this one would have to be changed to not applicable, and we'd be able to put in some commentary. But if not, um, here it gives you some guidance on what needs to be implemented. Basically, you need to have MFA implemented for your root user so that this finding is no longer a finding and it's remediated. So, okay. Connect workflow status. So let's say for the purposes of this example, we have determined that this is not applicable anymore. We've resolved it because we use a digital MFA versus a physical hardware token, an RSA token, something like that. So hit resolved and changing workflow status. Resolved. Okay. So we'll go back one level, see if a refresh will do anything. Hmm. So it doesn't change it directly here, um, but this isn't where you will change the official status of the finding. So this is a good place to work out of at a glance, but Security Hub is more so intended um, to ingest the data and kind of categorize your overall security score, your fail checks. I guess you could work individually. like on what findings you have. But the real purpose of this demo is for the longer term assessment or the audit. So let's close this. Now, this information gets segued into Audit Manager. So here you'll see Audit Manager. There's two active assessments that I've run. Um, One of them, it was a test assessment. The other one was just an assessment on my account. So just for the purposes of a demo, I can show you how I did that. You create an assessment, just call it cloud test, cloud test. You choose an S3 bucket where you would want to put it. So I'll just choose one of my. Normally in this use case, you would have an audit location where all your audit files would go. And then you select the framework to run your audit up against. So here we will choose NIST, select it, and there it is. All the controls that will be run up against it. Okay. For some reason, it opened up. Let me collapse that. Okay, so then it gives you the controls, the framework details, basically what's going to happen, and then you create the assessment. Now, I'm not going to run it because these assessments generally take 24 hours to accomplish. So I am going to go back and show you one that was already completed. Okay, so we're going to go to into assessments, NIST, and here there's the individual results. Some families had results, some don't. You'll notice that some of them can't be tested. So like awareness and training, you can't gauge whether your user base is trained or not in AWS unless you set that up explicitly. So some of these things are going to have zeros just because you need to verify them outside of the AWS environment. Okay, so let's see access controls. Let's see what account management has. It gives you the control details, and this is what's called an evidence folder. It gives you the evidence of what passed and what's not compliant. Um, okay, so this is compliant here. Let's take a look. Basically saying this IAM user group membership was within compliance. That's kind of the check that was done here. So this one's good, just for the sake of the example. One thing that you can do is include this in assessment report. So just as much as you want to include the findings, you want to include the things that were compliant as well. So let's include this in our assessment report. And let's go back. Let's look at one thing that's not compliant. Okay, it looks like this group was not in compliance. Gives you the value. Hmm. Let's go back here. And then these are pass and fail. Just wanted to make sure I was looking at the correct folder. Okay, and then these events here, you see what some of them are configuration changes. These are security hub event sources. So let's go look at one down here. Okay, this is what I was looking for. Um, so here it gives you a summary of a failed compliance check. This control checks for CloudWatch metric filters, and then it checks that that the log group name is configured for use with active multi-region CloudTrail. So we're not using multi-region, we're not using CloudTrail in this scenario. Um, so I would essentially mark this one as not applicable. But if I wanted to remediate it, if I was multi-region and I was using CloudTrail, I would look at this JSON, click the one that says remediation, and it provides a URL to the remediation. Now you'll note here it says CloudWatch.1. That is going to be important because it takes you directly to where the remediation will be. So here it is, CloudWatch.1, to not confuse it with CloudWatch.2, CloudWatch.3, so on and so forth. So here it gives you some guidance on how to um, fix this, the parameters, remediation, so on and so forth. For the sake of time, I'm just going to show you where to find the information. But going back here, um, knowing that this is not applicable, we're not going to include it in the assessment, and we're going to go back one level. We're going to highlight the failed one, and we're going to say remove from assessment report. Remove from assessment. Now, the reason I showed you both of these examples is kind of we're doing a refinement of the initial assessment. It did an automatic assessment overnight. Took quite a bit of hours. Um, and then when you come back, you don't want to just take that assessment for face value. You want to analyze it, what's applicable, what's not applicable, what are some things that can be quick fixes for remediation, and what are some things that we need to report to the system administrators, which what are we going to report to management? What kind of metrics are we going to show? So let's take a look back to the assessment. So here again, it has the controls that we were looking at, but there's a few things that I selected to be exported as an assessment. So here we go. I think it's, yeah. So this finding here, I basically put it in a queue. In real practice, you're gonna have a couple hundred in here. It's like, hey, like I want these to be part of the final assessment or the audit. And then once that's done, you'll hit generate assessment report, cloud final, cloud final, and then you'll generate. So it's going. And essentially it's aggregating what you asked for it to put aside. Like, hey, like this is things that you want part of your final assessment, or your final pre-assessment, if you will. And then you can see kind of a list of like, hey, this is what's good to go in my AWS account. This is what needs work before I get the official assessment for the NIST 853 framework. Okay, let's see. Hmm, there we go. So highlight it, download, open it up. It's gonna come out here. Okay, switch over here, stop share. And this is kind of an example of the final product. So you will get a AWS document, um, kind of detailing out what were the findings, um, dates, controls included. It's just one, just for the sake of an example. How many were compliant? So this would reflect controls that were compliant, but you can put non-compliant, their status, their notes, so on and so forth. Um, Now this report can also be refined. You can edit the fields that are displayed, but in summary, this is the full life cycle. You um, select an AWS account. You enable your AWS config. You enable your AWS Security Hub, and then you run a report through AWS Audit Manager, effectively preparing your account for to be audited, and then seeing where it stands in terms of the NIST 800-53 framework. And this concludes my presentation.